evening and welcome to another episode of Leadership Matters because leadership matters. I am Dr. Kenroy Burt, your host and leadership coach and mentor. And I am excited this evening because we are not just on Facebook, we're not just on YouTube, we're not just on Instagram, but we're also in the studio 92.9 FM Voice of Barbados. We are so excited to be on radio now and being able to carry this conversation to the entire world. And we are grateful for the partnership that we have with Crumbs Bakery. Let's pause for a cause at this moment.
Crumbs Bakery, so good, even down to the last crumb.
Thank you again to Crumbs Bakery. And I'm so excited this evening to have with me Managing Director and Principal Consultant with the Joan, you're going to tell me the name of the team again. It just slipped me.
Underwood Talent Development Services.
Underwood Talent Development Services. It just slipped me right there. Joan Underwood, and she is here with us to discuss. We're going to be talking leadership, our usual leadership conversation, but we're going to be talking about leading and managing change. Now, one of the things that has really hit us extremely hard during this period is the sudden changes that we've been forced to make. And we've recognized that there are several persons that are going through even mental health issues as a result of all the changes that have taken place. I said to a couple persons recently that COVID did not gently move us. It shoved us, it pushed us. And we are now in a totally different dynamic. So this evening we want to talk about leading and managing change with Joan Underwood. But before we jump into that, Joan is no stranger to the broadcast, but we're going to, just for the sake of those persons who may be hearing about it for the first time, we're going to ask Joan to just introduce herself. Joan, tell us who you are.
All right, thank you so very much, Kenroy. It's a pleasure to be back with you again. Leadership really does matter, and so I embrace every opportunity to talk about that. So as you would have heard, my name is Joan Underwood. I'm from Antigua and Barbuda, living in Barbados currently by virtue of the fact that I'm married to a Barbadian. I'm a talent development specialist, a master trainer. I am a professional coach, and I focus a lot on leadership development, my coaching practice and my training practice, and as well with my consulting. And that's why Leadership Matters resonates so much with me. I work with individual leaders as well as organizations to help their leaders maximize their potential so that we have high-performing individuals, high-performing organizations, both public and private sector, and ultimately a high Caribbean.
Fantastic. So that is in a nutshell who Joan Underwood is. The one thing that she forgot to say is that she also has extremely good taste because she chose a Barbadian. Okay. So Joan, we want to talk a little bit about this this whole concept of change. We recognize that it has really, really, really been a tough period for some persons. I believe that COVID happened to many persons and COVID happened for some people. But what I've found is that it seems as though more persons became victim to COVID and because of the several changes. What have you been seeing on the ground? What has your experience been? You've been working and coaching leaders. What has the experience been?
This has really taken a lot of people off their crease. Leaders feel most comfortable when they're in control of the situation. And there's just so much about COVID over which we have zero control. And so you mentioned earlier mental health issues, because for someone who's used to being in charge, who's used to making decisions and then having people line up behind it, to be constantly on your back foot trying to get your balance, it's very unnerving and it can erode your self-confidence. And for leaders, a lot of times when the self-confidence goes, then they're completely out of their equilibrium. So yes, a lot of people are still in react mode. One of the biggest challenges with that is it's not business as usual. And I hear people talking about can't wait to get back to normal. We are not going back to normal. We will never revert to what the normal was pre-COVID, because everything has shifted. It's as if we're on a new axis now. So we can't go back to that old alignment. So we have to realize we need a new paradigm, we need a new mindset if we are going to be able not just to survive, but to thrive in this, in COVID now and whatever post-COVID looks like.
Fantastic. So it has, as you said, it's taken a toll on several persons, and the irony is that as leaders, we're expected to continue. We're expected to carry forward the organization in spite of what might be happening in our lives personally. So let's speak a little bit now to some leaders out there who may be navigating or probably struggling to navigate this entire period. What are some of the key things that they may take into consideration? Some of the things that you would advise them this evening for us to focus on. But before we do that, Joan, let's pause again for another cause. Yeah, so we are talking to Joan Underwood this evening, and we are so excited to have this conversation on leading and managing change. So, Joan, just before we took a break, we were talking about some of those things that we would want to advise and to probably some tips, whatever it be, that we would want to share
Yeah.
with leaders as they try to navigate this period of consistent change.
Okay, one of the first things that I would say is to be able to discern the difference between things that concern you and things over which you have either control or influence. So there are many things that concern us in the context of COVID. So the national infection rate and, whether it's rising or falling, that's a big concern for all of us. On an individual level, we can't move the needle on that too much. So to spend a lot of time worrying about it, preoccupied about it, is counterproductive, because that helps to fuel the senselessness. What we need to do is to focus in on the things that we can influence and or control. And by focusing our time, our energy, our efforts there, we can have an impact that again can fuel the confidence that we need to be able to continue to move forward and to inspire confidence in others. So that would be my first thing. Be very intentional about where you're spending your time and your energy, instead of focusing on things that concern you, but over which you have neither influence or control. Focus on what you control and on what you influence. That would be my first tip for our leaders. The second thing that I would want to emphasize is that, and I mentioned before, it can't be business as usual. So pre-pandemic, we would have said to our leaders, do your research, gather your data, analyze the data, make a decision, double check your decision, and then move forward with implementation. In this volatile, uncertain, complex, and highly ambiguous environment in which we're operating, we don't have time for that. You have to make decisions based on the information that's available to you in real time. You move forward, and as new information becomes available, then you adjust what you're doing to reflect the new information. We cannot be paralyzed by the fact that we don't have all the facts, all the data, because the facts and the data are changing daily. So we have to make our best judgment decisions, move forward with them, continue to scan the environment, and as new information comes to light, make the adjustment. I think PM Motley does it brilliantly when she talks about the gas and the brakes. So she, based on what information is available, we went with the gas now. New information becomes available, we're going to do brakes, maybe we might even have to reverse. But it's dynamic. I mentioned before, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that acronym VUCA. Prior to the pandemic, the world was VUCA, but now it's on steroids. So people who thought that they existed in a fairly stable environment before, because for example, the public sector, people may have thought, well, government is continuous, we save, but nothing is a given the uncertainty, given the VUCA conditions that are being experienced worldwide.
Okay, Joan. So I want to pause at this time just so that we can hear from our sponsors, and then we're going to jump straight back into the conversation.
Here's some of your best news since the lockdowns. 7 Crumbs Bakery locations are now open on Sundays and bank holidays from 7 in the morning. They are Eagle Hall, Wildy, Fairchild Street, Oystons, Mylords Hills, Pitestown and Fairview, while the other 10 Crumbs locations open Monday to Saturday as usual. Crumbs for a wide variety of fresh cakes, pastries and bread. Crumbs, so good, even down to the last crumb.
Thank you very much for joining us again. And remember, we're having a conversation with Joan Underwood. So, Joan, we understand that this is not the normal straight line environment. It's exact. It's all around the place. It's jumping all around, and we really and truly have no control over it. So you're talking to leaders right now, persons who are listening into you. You spoke a little bit just before we took the break. You spoke about VUCA. Can we go a little deeper into that?
With the vaccine coming into being, and persons approaching the second vaccine, we hope that there's a reduction in the volatility. But again, you have different strains, so that's part of the uncertainty. So the solution that we got to deal with the volatility in one situation, there's uncertainty because there's additional volatility in the system. Then there's complexity. It's not just one variable that we're dealing with multiple variables. So we have the health situation and the burden that places on our healthcare system. At the same time, we have the economical situation because we have job loss or reduction. We have the tourism sector just practically closing down. So we have the volatility, a lot of change happening, not a lot of stability in the system. We have the uncertainty because we don't know what's going to come up next. You solve one problem, something else comes up. The complexity too, because it's not as if you can just focus in on the health aspect, the ripple effects. Because look, for example, we have to take into consideration with the drop off in tourism, our foreign exchange reserves are being adversely impacted. So the complexity is there. And the ambiguity. We are in completely uncharted territory. Yes, there may have been pandemics before, but nothing that we can say is an actual precise template for what we're experiencing now. So there's no certainty involved. And that's why, again, we have to make decisions based on the information we have and be ready to pivot, be ready to adjust. We have to be adaptable. We have to be agile, and we have to be willing to learn on the job, not just every day, but from moment to moment. We have to be willing to learn and to adjust based on what we've learned.
No, we're hearing a lot these days about agile organizations. And I think that as that discussion is starting to rise, we're hearing several persons who are consistently reminding us of the importance of an agile organization. Could you just briefly share with the listeners, the viewers, about this whole concept of an agile organization?
All right. So again, because of the nature of the environment in which we're operating, we don't have the luxury of being able to get things perfect and wait for things to be perfect. What we have to do is to have incremental improvements, and then, we're like building the car as we're driving the car.
Mhm.
So that ability is about. So, and if you think about Apple, for example, new products, and there may be glitches or things that don't quite work the way they would have hoped or had intended, and they fix it. They send you, some patch or something, an upgrade, and they move on. And that's how we need to be thinking and operating as leaders. We can't wait for it to be perfect. We have to go for the incremental change and keep building, keep improving, keep taking in the data that we're getting in terms of feedback on where we are, what's happening in both the external and the internal environment, and then make the adjustments and keep moving.
Fantastic. So as we delve a little further into the whole concept of leading and managing this change. So we're speaking to these leaders out here who they're faced with the challenges. They're faced with becoming agile, adaptable, all these different things, flexible. They're faced with making sure that all these things are happening. Let's talk now about the interaction that they ought to have. Let's talk a little bit more now the interaction between leader and the followers, the colleagues. Leader and
Right.
let's talk a bit about that interaction. How does that interaction look? Because we could go up there, we could drive them, or we could work with them. How does it look?
Right. And that is such an important question, because you talk about going out there and driving them. Now, pre-pandemic stats, 70% of change initiatives fail. Not because the change itself was not important, not necessary, but 70% of change initiatives fail because we don't pay enough attention to the people side of change. We focus on the technology, on the project management, on the budget. And even those we don't always get right. But we don't put the work in with the people. We just expect them to line up like good soldiers. And if there's one thing we know from experience as leaders, it doesn't always pan out that way. So it's important to be very intentional about leading people through change and not just managing change in terms of the project, the budget, the technology. And, every person is different. So it's not an easy road to trod. But there's a model that I've found to be particularly effective in navigating the people change. I strongly advocate that leaders familiarize themselves with this model if they have another model that works. But in my book, I talk about the ADKAR model of change, and this is developed by ProSci, and it's an acronym, and I'll take you through each of the letters. So the A in ADKAR stands for awareness. The very first step is to create an awareness of the need for change. Why are we changing? What are the consequences of not changing? What's at risk? What's at stake? What's the exact nature of that change? And it's important to answer that question not once, not twice, but as often as you need for people to truly understand and appreciate the why of the change. So after the awareness comes the desire. So I understand what we're changing, why we're changing it, the consequences of not changing. Then the next thing we as leaders need to do is to work with our people to create within them, stimulate within them a desire to be part of the change. I can be fully aware of the change and have no desire to be a part of it. So in order to create the desire, I have to talk to the people that I'm leading to understand where they are, what motivates them, so that we can tap into what would cause them to want to be a part of this, right? So awareness followed by desire. Once we have awareness and desire, it's only then that we should proceed to build the knowledge in terms of, so how do we change? Unfortunately, we started jumping with the knowledge part. So we're training the people how to use the new system, but we haven't explained to them, we haven't created the awareness, we haven't built the desire. So they're not invested in acquiring this knowledge because they're not there with us in terms of wanting to be a change. So awareness, desire, knowledge. After knowledge, we need ability, because you can have knowledge but don't have the ability to execute with that knowledge. And so the enabling environment is important. So for example, let's look at work from home. It became necessary once the pandemic was in full force to revisit how we worked. We could no longer be gathered in the same brick and mortar space. So we went to work from home. Now, you can tell me, okay, this is why we need to work from home. Whether or not you have the desire is going to happen because we had a lockdown, right? The knowledge, okay, we're going to use Microsoft Teams, for example, but the ability, so I could have been trained in Microsoft Teams, but if I don't have internet at home, what good is that knowledge going to do for me? So the ability refers to skills, yes, but also to an enabling environment. And so it's important for us as leaders to be sensitive to that, to be in tune to that. What's the environment in which our people are operating? Is it conducive to what I'm asking them to do? So awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and then the R in ADKAR is for reinforcement. Because human nature is such that if you leave us alone, we're going to revert to what was comfortable. So we need to put systems in place to reinforce the change, the new normal, until we have to move to another normal. So that would be the model to bring the people along in the change process. That's the one that I advocate.
Fantastic. So let's just pause again for another cause, and then we're going to jump straight into our final segment. Thank you again to our sponsors, Crumbs Bakery and Crispy Chicken, coming on board and being a part of this conversation and ensuring this conversation is shared with as many persons as possible. So Joan, we're talking about the change. We're talking about dealing with people again. Oftentimes we more kind of, as you said, we jump into what we need to do and make sure that we have everything that we need to do organized, but we forget that it isn't just a case of what do I need to do, but who I'm dealing with. Now, there are some persons who may be struggling with even in their minds with that whole concept of change. Again, they're not willing to let go so that they could embrace the new. What do you say to those persons right now at this time?
All right, so change is not an event, it's a process. And, we go through a cycle, and a cycle, the change cycle is very similar to the grieving cycle, right? In terms of sense of loss and the anger and the bargaining. And hopefully we get to the point of acceptance. But for us in navigating it for ourselves as leaders, it's important for us to be cautious ourselves, but still be resolute, because we know what needs to happen. All right? Because, you can't stand up outside when a hurricane is raging and say, wind don't blow. All right. There was one man who walked the earth who had the power to do that, and
Say peace be still.
he's not running any companies or any ministries. So we need to, first of all, be able to accept the reality that is around us. And so, yes, have the emotional response in terms of the anxiety that you may experience, the fear in terms of how it, and process that as information, because that's our emotions give us information about how we experiencing something. Be curious about it, unpack it, not in a judgmental way, but in a way to help you understand so that you know how to move forward. So you may be concerned about, loss of employment, loss of income, about your children and what this is doing to their education and their future possibilities. And everyone is going through some trajectory of having an emotional response. So we need to create the space for them to be able to do so, to be supportive of our people as they do so. And we spoke about mental health before. If your organization doesn't have an assistance program to the social services, because they're governmental agencies that can help with that, draw on your clergy, whoever you look to for spiritual guidance to help you to navigate that space. So have your emotions, don't judge yourself, don't be harsh with yourself, but make a conscious decision to keep moving forward. Okay? So fear, yes, but fear is not fatal. Move forward. Feel the fear and deal with the situation anyway. To the extent that you can negotiate how you navigate the space. And, this is an opportunity for employers to be more empathetic, because different employees have different situations in their home environment. So it can't be one rule that we're seeking to apply across the board. Right? So we need to have some flexibility. And any employer, any leader that's the initial reaction is that we can't do that, I would remind you that pre-March 2020, you didn't think you could have work from home either. All right? So, no, you're not going to have all the answers. What you need is an open mind to be willing to try things, and it comes back to being agile. So be open to the possibilities. None of the great inventions that we have in the world came from somebody knowing immediately the exact how of it. They had a concept of what that needed to be accomplished, and they tried different ways to accomplish the what. So be sensitive to the emotions, but be committed to a forward trajectory. Be flexible in terms of the solution, because a solution that was working in December may not work in March, because again, it's volatile. The situation has changed. So very, very mindful of how change impacts us as people, as individuals. We need to have a more humanistic view as opposed to rules and regulations. And I think we're going to have a very interesting national, regional debate about jobs for jobs because of that same reason. Because we need to take into consideration people's belief systems. We need to take into consideration individual values, even as we all navigate this terrain together. There's no quick answer, there's no single answer, there's no fast answer, but we must be committed to finding answers and approaches to help us navigate these turbulent times.
Fantastic. Now, Joan, you could never imagine that we are pretty much out of time. Can't even believe it as soon as we start having this conversation. But Joan, in a couple of words, okay, we're faced with these changes. What are you seeing now from future leadership? What are you seeing from future leadership? What opportunities are there out there for us as leaders moving forward to really grab hold of the opportunities that are coming out of this COVID period?
All right, so there are two things I would say. Leadership exists at all levels. So, and this it is very obvious now, because leadership has become so decentralized because of our moving out of the brick and mortar. So
Yeah.
opportunity for leadership at all levels. So that would be my first observation. The second thing that I would say is the opportunity for leaders to build relationships.
Yeah.
Because far too often we get fixated on the task at hand and we don't invest the time in building relationship and getting to know and understand our people. There's no way that we're going to be successful in coming out of this pandemic if we don't build relationship with people, so we understand where our people are, we are able to engage them. Because the single biggest driver of employee engagement is the nature of the relationship they have with their direct manager. And if you don't build that relationship, these big asks, this work from home, this go the extra mile, they're not going to do that for you unless
They want.
they know you care about them and you're interested in them, not as units of production, but as people.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so very much, Joan. This has been another episode of Leadership Matters, because leadership matters. I'm always excited to have a conversation with Joan Underwood. I am so thankful for your time that you've spent with us this evening. So I encourage you to join us again two Mondays from now as we continue the conversation on leadership matters. Remember, it's a bi-weekly half-hour series aimed at supporting our leaders, and we are here right beside them, ensuring that we support them through this entire journey. God bless, and hope to see you and hear you again very soon.